Good afternoon. Welcome to the January 8th Public Works and Finance Committee meeting. And we'll get started with the approval of Public Works Finance Committee December 11th minutes.
I would move to approve, Madam Chairman.
I will second.
Okay. Since we also had the transfer, and I wasn't at that meeting, they looked fine to me, and I read them over, so they've been approved.
Okay.
Unanimously. All right, and now we need the selection. Second item, selection of committee chair and vice chair. And we've had a little bit of conversation, so you want to say what your thoughts were, Jim?
Well, you've already been appointed as the chairman, as the new council president at a previous meeting. So it's just about the vice chair, and I'm nominating Brandy to be the vice chair. And she said she wouldn't refuse, so
That's right.
I guess we can.
I will accept the nomination to be the
Okay.
vice chair.
Okay, great. And so then I will remain as chair, and then Brandy will be vice chair. Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. And the third item, hi, Sarah, is disbursement report for December 2017.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'd like Sarah to introduce a couple new members of our finance staff downstairs, trying to keep the council apprised of changes down there. So.
So, kind of as I stated earlier, we have revamped down there, and we have two new positions. The first one is our accounts payables and receivables supervisor, which is Jennifer Meekoff. And Jennifer started actually in September. It's just kind of been crazy getting her up here since then. And then Brittany Gunderson started today, and she's our treasury management internal auditor.
Hi, well, welcome. Thank you.
And I would like to make sure that you understand it's not new positions, it's new people in
New
positions.
people in positions.
And the positions
reorganized
have been
positions.
reorganized, but we haven't added staff.
No.
I understand the reason for your clarification, Mr. Reedner. All right, very good. And so, Sarah, you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure, yep. For month ending December 31, 2017, our major expenditures totaled $2,370,158. Our largest expenditure was payroll. It came in at $1,019,167. And as you go down the list, there's a couple of larger payments that we had in capital outlay. We had our booster station phase 1 payment, and it's actually payment number 8 for $347,831.94. And then we had our Whitcomb second quarter payment for our dispatch services, which was $136,338.21. Other than that, the other payments are pretty straightforward and monthly standard expenditures. If you have any questions.
I don't have any questions.
Well, if I may, what you have in your hand there, Catherine, is our major expenditure sheet that we were going to hand out. Sorry about that. It should have got to you earlier, but that will be handed out every month prior to you seeing the disbursement report.
Oh, okay. Great, thank you. Yeah, no, the nice thing about at least being through the cycle a couple times, definitely the numbers are familiar. And thank you for pointing out things that I wouldn't know. So that's good. So with that, we'll just approve.
I would move to approve the disbursement report for December.
I will second.
Okay. All in favor?
All right.
All right, we've moved it. All right, the fourth item is first quarter financial report, October 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2017 for 2018. Now we have a new sheet.
We have to sign that.
You need to sign
That's
that
for the
so
disbursement.
disbursements would be approved.
I don't know if it has the one in the packet doesn't have the right names.
No, I noticed that.
Yeah, I believe that was updated, and that one's the
This
new
one
one.
is the updated one,
Yep.
yeah. I thought you were renaming me.
Your parents did a good job of that. We didn't need to revisit.
All right, so in looking at this report, this is basically just an overview of budget versus actual for our first quarter. If you go down, you can pretty much see that everything's, at this point, it could usually be somewhere up to 25%, but around this time every year, we're always a little lower because we don't have capital projects and stuff like that really going on right now. So our expenditures are sitting for revenues at 10.8% and expenditures 13.8%.
And if I may, again, the numbers that you're seeing are cyclical. For instance, revenues are lagging behind expenditures at this point because our expenditures, as Sarah said, tend to fluctuate depending on capital projects and those sorts of things, but for instance, our payroll stays pretty much the same all year round. Our revenues, we will see most of our tax revenues in January, and those will be receipted this month. So typically, our revenues will lag until those large payments are made.
Yep.
Remember the last time you were here, was all the bond, the new bond that got done? Because has that started to happen yet?
No, that is not until May.
Okay. When
Yep,
it begins to
exactly.
happen.
We'll
Okay.
pay our last principal payment on the current bond that we have, and then the refinancing will happen, and we'll start a new payment in May, and then twice a year after that.
Okay, thanks. I couldn't remember the details about that.
If we can go back to the receipts report for
Sure.
just a moment. Do you know offhand what that $700 contribution donation line is, item?
What is that in?
I'm sorry, I didn't
No, it's
think to
okay.
ask you that.
I do not know off the top of my head. I can look
Okay.
really quick and see if we have some backup in here. If not, I can get that to you by the end of the meeting.
That's fine.
Sure.
Thank you.
What line is it under 590? Which fund?
Under contribution.
No,
I don't
see where
have
it
that in
is.
here.
It's
Yeah,
in
it's a donation.
in capital projects. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is in capital projects. So you're just wondering, like, how?
Could be
Just
for a
what the
band,
donation
could have been
is.
for
Yeah.
Chances are,
Blackbird,
yeah.
Station,
Oh, yeah.
could have been for any of that stuff.
Okay. Glad you asked that. It's always good to kind of go through the numbers. All right, anything else? All right, with that,
That's it? Okay.
thank you, Sarah.
All right,
Sarah.
thank you.
Okey dokey. Line item 5 is 2309 and 2315 Atani Drive, the lot line adjustment, and Ryan Cash is going to do the presentation.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners.
All right.
Ryan Cash with Community Development, and thank you for hearing this lot line adjustment request. So for tonight, we have a lot line adjustment request for 2315 Atani Drive, located in Rolling Hills 8th Edition. If you direct your attention to the PowerPoint presentation to your rear, you can go over this real quick. So the lot located on Atani Drive is this one right here. This aerial photography was from 2012, so we don't have actual current conditions on many of the other lots. This is the last lot along Atani Drive slated for development. But for your reference, you can see 6th Street and then Atani Drive, the retention area here. And we also have Mountain View and Westview Drive, as well as Hathaway, and Atani continues up to the top of the water tower there. So with this respect, here we have the current conditions. We have Ryan Atani that has put in a request for a lot line adjustment between 2315 and 2309 Atani. The current square footage of the subject property is 7,472 square feet, with over 78 feet of lineal frontage, and they are looking to have a lot line adjustment of a total of 9 feet to the west of 2309 Atani, and that frontage currently sits at 75 linear feet. So in your packet, you can see the details of the application and their request. Everything else within here is pertinent to that, but essentially what I've described here is what you see in the application as well that's sitting before you. So that area is zoned as an R2, which is considered single family. We also have the overall request kind of broken down onto these dynamics here. So after the lot line adjustment of the 9 feet to the west, you can see the gain of a total of 8,503 square feet for the 2315 Atani Drive, and a gain of 87.3 linear feet, and a overall reduction from 2309 to 8,161 square feet, and a reduction of 66 linear feet. So the zoning requirements for an R2, the minimum lot width is 60 feet for single-family dwellings. The minimum lot area is 7,000 square feet, and the setbacks to the front, we have 15 foot or 20 foot for a garage facing the street. The rear is 20 feet, and the side is a 5 foot minimum, and the sum of two sides shall not be less than 15 feet. One thing to note that with the adjustments after the proposed request, the subject property that's being gained from 2309 will still meet the minimum setback requirements of 8 feet on either side of the existing house. So there won't be any negative impact to the overall lot line adjustment. So staff's recommendation is to recommend the approval of the lot line adjustment with no conditions.
Okay, so I just out of curiosity, did you happen to draw what it would look like with the, yeah?
That's correct, ma'am. We'll go back over here. So with the lot line adjustment,
No, I mean like on the side of the right, so that line's going to stay the same.
So the existing line is this one right here. And so they're going to expand into 2309 by 9 feet. And
But
that's
they're not going to give anything up with the retention pond?
No, the retention pond, a portion of that retention pond falls within that subject property. And that's the whole purpose of this
I
lot line
realized-
adjustment.
Oh, yeah, no, I figured that. But I just had wondered if then they were going to make it so the retention pond didn't encroach their property line.
Oh, the retention pond is not going to be impacted. It's part of the site mediation. The whole intent is the building envelope on this parcel here, which is currently undeveloped. It's having a negative impact on development because of that encroachment of that retaining pond plus some compromising terrain. So the reason for the request of gaining that 9 feet is it puts the remainder of this lot in the same proportionality of size compared to the rest of Atani Drive. In addition, it expands that building envelope further to the west, which allows them to actually develop a house of equal size in comparison to the rest of the houses in the neighborhood.
Oh, I understand that completely. I was just mostly curious as to if the retention, because I don't know this, the retention pond, because it sits on that side of the property line, does it belong to them?
Technically, it does, that portion, but it's up to the HOAs and the overall community development of that.
Hi, Bill.
If I
Thank
might
you.
clarify, that was a temporary detention facility before this property is platted. That detention pond no longer exists.
No.
So it's replaced with new detention pond, so that is just a building lot in that plat now.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thanks for the help. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Seems pretty straightforward to me. Everything still within the boundaries of what we need, so
Yep.
recommend approval if it was up to me.
Okay, and would you like it to go to consent agenda? Can we do that? Or do you think?
I think so. It meets all those zoning requirements, and I don't have any.
And Jim, you're okay with that too?
Yeah.
Okay. So then we'll put that on consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6, FY20 Local Highway Safety Improvement Program, grant application.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
So before you today, we have a request to submit a grant application, and I'll just give you guys a little bit of history. This time last year, we came before you and we presented an application that included a Phase 1 and Phase 2 for the same project area. And the Phase 1 portion of the project was approved. So that would be on 3rd Street from State Highway 8 or Jackson to the alley between Llewellyn between Lilly and Asbury. So Phase 1 of this project has already been funded. They then recommended that we come back this year and apply for Phase 2, which is the application that we'll be submitting that I'm presenting here today. Phase 1 was a $419,000 project. We were awarded $389,000 in federal funds and with a $30,000 match. So one of the things I just looked up today is that they have that scheduled in the Idaho Transportation Improvement Plan for design in 20 and construction in 21, even though last year we had an FY19 application. So, and they updated the Transportation Improvement Plan in October. So one of the things that we can consider here with this new application is they may, if we are awarded, they may allow us to design both portions at the same time and construct at the same time. That would be ideal. I don't know that will happen, but because they've moved that design year ahead, it may. So I'll go ahead and kind of go over with you the elements of this project, which are very similar to what we had last year for improvements. Phase 2, as I said, includes the portion between Asbury. There's an alley between Lilly and Asbury, so the project starts there, and then it goes to Llewellyn, which is just past Papa Murphy's. And within that area, we will have demolition removal of the deteriorated sidewalks and the non-compliant ADA infrastructure that is there. And this is called a corridor or a systematic approach to all of these improvements. So we'll be replacing approximately 430 square yards of deteriorated concrete sidewalk. The width will vary from 5 to 15 feet depending upon existing structures and right-of-way. And then we'll have approximately 400 feet of linear curb and 4 ADA pedestrian curb ramps. And we also will install 8 new LED luminaires to improve nighttime visibility. So we're anticipating total project cost not to exceed $305,000, and that match under these projects is 7.34% or $22,500. We're working also too with the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency. They also had contribution that they proposed in Phase 1 and have also stated that they would propose to include funds within this. And one of the things that we designated last year is that the URA would assist with the lighting. And that's one of the things that is not as high on the list of funding levels or a priority in this type of application. So having the URA assist with that gives us a stronger application. So we'll be working with the URA over the next week to determine that number and also finalizing the costs. We've just had the holiday and a lot of people have had illnesses, so we're fine-tuning our numbers still, but I can tell you it won't exceed $305,000. It may be slightly lower than that. So today, our request is to submit the application, which is due on the 18th, to not exceed $305,000 in grant funding and have a match of $22,500. And again, this would not be until design would take place in FY20, possibly 21. We're not sure how that will all work, and the construction would be in 21 or 22. I'm not sure. So we'll see.
So, Alyssa, last year, when we made this application, there were some provisions for upgrading the lighting, the street lighting, and that goes didn't it go all the way as far as Llewellyn, or was that shorter than that? It seemed like there were street light upgrades that were part of last year's application.
Yes.
And that got approved, right? I mean, we have the funding for that?
Yes.
So
part of Phase 1.
When these other sidewalk improvements, the lighting will already be approved for that from last year?
No, the lighting goes with each section, with each phase. So what we're hoping is that we'll be able to design and construct as one project, but the lighting for each phase goes with each phase. The lighting wasn't approved in addition to
it only went as far as Phase 1. It seemed like it was part of the application all the way down to where the former, or where
It's
the Nissan
because
dealership-
last year we submitted a request for Phase 1 and Phase 2, but they only approved Phase 1. And so in our presentation, we talked about the entire systematic approach for the corridor application.
That's my memory's foggy about how that, because I knew we applied for that all the way down there and then not all.
Yes,
Okay.
they had advised us to apply in case other applications didn't come in. They just don't know what the allocation of funds will be. So we were able to, as I said, get Phase 1 funded, and now we're applying for Phase 2.
I have a question. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
Is this just the north side of 3rd Street?
No, it's both sides.
Okay. Okay. So the coordination with the URA will piece so that the
Yes.
lighting matches on both sides of Third Street and
Yes.
things like that? Okay.
And so just for reference points, it's, where C&T used cars, that's kind of the
Right.
cutoff point there. And then it goes past Papa Murphy's. And there's a portion of it that got done this last year near the car dealership. Is it Nissan car dealership now? So a portion of that got completed already. So the bid that we had for actually Phase 2 is a little bit less this year than it was last year, or the costs.
And when do you expect to hear if you have been awarded?
We would know March to June sometime. Where we would get a preliminary approval, then it would be subject to the Idaho Transportation Board approval.
That's where I was going. So, and I figured you and Les know this answer. So, are we doing anything underneath that in those years?
As
Are we
far
doing
as-
any other street, sewer, water? Are we doing any other
No, I think
at that time?
a majority of that was taking care of what we have planned to do when ITD repaved and did some things this last year. So to my knowledge, we don't have any other infrastructure improvements planned for that portion of the corridor.
That's right. Yeah, good. Oh, we're all good. Yay. Good. All right, that's good.
Yes, we're looking forward to having,
Just wanna make sure.
sections of corridors that are fully completed with the underground infrastructure and all of the,
I know.
above-ground infrastructure also.
Super exciting. Yeah. Anything else?
That'd be great if you could do it all at the same time.
It would, and it
Yeah.
would save in mobilization costs, so it's to their benefit, actually, to allow us to do that. So.
I'd like to put this on regular agenda, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
I'm fine with
Yeah.
putting it up for everyone to see.
Yeah, because there's a lot. This has been so many phases and stuff, and
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
You can
good.
do, yeah, you can do either, I was just going to say. you
Yeah,
can do
no, I
the-
just feel
they've
like
typically done on
I like the
consent, though, I
fact that
think.
it's connecting so far the past, and then all the infrastructure work that got done, and so it just shows this completion piece of all the things that have been done that you all put together. So I think that's good. All right, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right, seventh item is task order agreement for design and construction administration of booster stations Phase 2.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Hi.
Afternoon again. Well, the city's been working on some larger scale water projects over the last few years, and those of you that have been on the council have heard of those before, and obviously Brandy being new, you may not have as much background on it. We are looking at the next phase. There are overall 4 phases amongst all of the projects that are involved. This is actually the final project of the 4 that will come before you for this portion of the work. And overall, there are 2 large projects. One is the Well 10 project, which has 2 phases, and then the booster station replacements project, which has 2 phases. The Well 10, Phase 1 was done. That was the drilling. That was completed a year and a half ago. And then Phase 2 for the well is in design right now. Council approved a contract this fall, past fall. Phase 1 of the booster project is in construction right now, and you're going to see some pictures today about some of those, just as a point of reference of what some of the buildings might look like in this current phase, which is Phase 2. So this is the last design contract we'll be bringing forward related to these 2 big water projects. So this is Phase 2 of the Moscow booster stations. And part of the reasoning for this has to do with the condition of the stations that are out there. And again, I'm backing up a little bit because Brandy hasn't had
No,
the
I
background.
appreciate it too. It's always
Everybody remember
it's always
that
appreciated.
heard it a while ago.
Believe
So
me.
these are projects, just I'll say it right up front, that we have a Idaho Department of Environmental Quality State Revolving Fund loan to fund a portion of this work. And so that dictates some of how we do things. And so this will be the last project within that funding package. So overall, we have 6 booster stations within the city. We're physically replacing 5 of them. And one of them will be decommissioned because we're addressing it through one of the 5. Okay? So we're, in essence, consolidating 2 high-pressure zones into one at Vista. So the first 3, White Avenue, Taylor, and Vista, are all under construction right now. The next 2 will be Ponderosa and Indian Hills. And this design contract that's before you today is going to address those 2. So Ponderosa Station, just to help folks understand what we're talking about, this is on the north end, Orchard Avenue up here. So this is the Ponderosa neighborhood, if you will, Ponderosa Drive through here, Highlands Drive, Landy Lane, all of those. And this little odd shape right here represents where the current booster station is located, on just east of Orchard on Ponderosa. And this is what it looks like. A big chunk of sidewalk. There's a lot underneath here. Well, I should say a lot. It's not a very big station, unfortunately. That's part of the problem. It is a below-ground station, which those are no longer allowed through state regulations with DEQ for water quality issues. So they all have to be elevated today. This is how we get into it. We have these access hatches. And then when you look down in, this is kind of what they are. And then there's a shot here down inside, so you can get a feel for how confined this is. This is a small station as it exists today, consists of 2 pumps, smaller pump here, which is kind of the domestic flow pump, and the larger pump that addresses fire flow. There are no redundancies in this system, so if this pump fails, there's not a second pump to take its place. There's not backup power supply available. The fire pump essentially is inadequate in terms of providing fire flow to the demand for the area that it serves. So those are the kind of things that exist in all of the stations that we're dealing with and that we want to resolve. We also want to make them more accessible when it comes to maintenance of these kind of facilities. They're underground, they're confined, they're moist. You see the older, some of the systems, the electronics are certainly a lot older. They definitely are in need of upgrade, both physically but also operationally, just in terms of what their capacities are. Every one of these stations has problems with providing sufficient fire flow. So the concept for this particular station is to relocate it a little bit to the north. We were just looking at a site right about here. This is the Peekaboo Estates subdivision, approved by the City Council a couple years ago now, and has been under construction the last 2 construction seasons. And we'll zoom in a little bit on that west end. Again, this is Orchard here on the left. Zooming in a bit on the west end, you see this Tract A right here. That is a piece of land that was included in the plat. It is too small to be a regular building lot, in essence, in the overall scheme of the zoning, but it is sufficient size to allow a booster station. And so the city actually has acquired this tract for the replacement station for Ponderosa. Excuse me. This gives you a bit of the aerial. Again, this is the Peekaboo Estates, and this kind of dark area represents where the road is now constructed through there. Each of these little lots or lines here are lot lines amongst the lots. And again, zooming in, this is the Tract A piece that the city's acquired. So that's the location for the new station. Down here, this little red circle that shows you where the old station is. So we're just a bit north. And the station currently serves a high-pressure zone that really includes all this area to the north, all the way out to the north end of the city, a little bit to the south of here. So with the piping work that was done as part of the Peekaboo, this is set up to provide that same service at that new location. The next site is the Indian Hills Booster Station. This will look very similar. When we get to it, here's Indian Hills Drive, so we're just south of Steiner. Indian Hills goes up onto the hill here, the hilltop, and then Northwood Drive, the church sits up in here. This is the Grove apartment complex down in this area, Southwood Drive coming through, and the station sits right there. So the high-pressure zone is really what's shown in yellow here, heading off to the east. All of that area is served by this pump station. And it looks like that from the outside. So very similar, a similar era of construction. In this case, some of the electronic control systems were put above ground next to the apartment complex, venting for the vaults, for gas issues, that type of thing. And a similar type of access. See, we're right next to the street. There's the church in the background. And that's what's inside. So it has a very similar look. Again, in this case, you see some of the moisture. They tend to get wet and stay wet. This particular unit has, heaters that were added in over the years to try to dry it out. They are a bit challenging. I think only one pump in this location, which is a bit of a problem for us, frankly. So this shows you that general area. So this is the Indian Hills neighborhood. That existing station I just showed you is right there. That little star is located. And we have a couple of sites identified for this. We've not acquired the site yet, and that's part of the contract work here is to help us finalize that site acquisition, if you will, just determining how that's going to work in terms of what the property looks like. We've done hydraulic analysis of the system, and this map and the next one by HDR show what the system needs are in terms of construction. And we looked at two potential sites. One is right here, so again, just north of the Southwood Street, the Southwood Avenue, and the Grove apartment complex in that currently undeveloped patch of ag land. And that would include a line that would tie in at Southwood, come up to the station, feed it, and then a line that would go on up the hill to tie into the system up on Indian Hills. And if you recall a meeting a couple weeks ago, we were looking at the potential school site down here, and there was some lot division work that was happening. And there was a gentleman that owned this piece of property right here came in and said, hey, I'm interested in doing some things. His property would be one that we would need to pass through, and there's been some initial discussions with him about that, and that looks like it may be positive. We've also had some discussions with the owner of the proposed site, and that seems to be looking positive as well. So that's one potential site. Everything else you see here in red represents a replacement of existing water lines. Okay? Now, the problem in this particular neighborhood, in this high-pressure zone, is the lines are small enough that even with the larger booster system, larger pumps, there's not enough capacity available within the main itself. Right? There's too much friction. The lines are too small to get the fire flow we need. So we need to update and enlarge the size of these sections of the water lines in order to get sufficient fire flow within the neighborhood. And that was anticipated with the project. It was from the day one. We knew we were going to have to replace water line along Indian Hills Drive and up in the neighborhood through here in some fashion to make it all work. So the design of that system, whatever it finally ends up being, is also part of this contract in terms of design and construction management. The second site we've considered, and there are a number of them that we looked at elsewhere up here to the north, but kind of the second current runner, if you will, would be a site here. This is the Alice Street right-of-way. So that's an existing street developed, part of the Indian Hills years ago. And the intent is that Alice Street will eventually come all the way through here. We've got city park property right in here. So potentially we could work with that park property to lay a site somewhere, maybe in this area, and then serve it off of the end of this line in Palouse River Drive coming north. And again, red would be the water lines that we'd have to do with that. So that's the second site. Frankly, we're leaning more towards this one for a number of reasons. We just think it'd probably be a better location. Certainly a lot easier for access, tucked away a little bit in terms of proximity to the neighbors and visibility, those types of things. So we like to keep them as tucked away as we can so they don't create any concerns for the neighborhood. Okay, so those are the current projects that would be addressed within this contract, okay, in terms of doing the design of both of those stations and the design of the water lines associated. The contract would also assist the city in construction management and a certain amount of inspection, that type of thing. There's a couple other items in there that are things like green reserve memos. Part of the state revolving fund loan is we have to show a certain amount of energy conservation, energy savings, so that relates to that. There's some other items in there about an assessment of variable frequency drive motor systems, which allow much more flexibility operationally in just getting those size, so that's also within this. But the primary bulk of this is design of the booster stations, the 2 stations, and construction management assistance to the city related to those, plus the design and construction management of the water lines that were shown. Now, we received some questions about what might these look like and what potential impacts could they have on the neighbors and neighborhood and those kind of things. So I thought I'd take a few minutes and just run through what we're doing right now on those first 3 projects in Phase 1, so you get a feel for what these might look like and just how they might fit within neighborhoods.
Can you go back to the picture where you showed the 2 alternatives? We've got the parkland you're talking about there is kind of in play as it might be involved in an exchange for other parkland.
Potentially.
Does that affect your decision on?
It could, yes. And that's something that came up much more recently than these 2 concepts in terms of whether or not we would have a space here or would that maybe go away. I mean, that certainly has to play into the discussion.
Yeah, if that's not parkland, if that's developed as if that's platted for housing, then maybe.
Then we'd probably look at, maybe we'd look at approaching a property owner down here, something closer to the road, perhaps. It's not associated with the park property. Obviously, then we're, having to acquire more space that we don't currently have in the city. So yeah, that does play into it. Like I say, that's something that this analysis was actually done, I think, last year, and these maps were created under that process in the hydraulic analysis. That concept of maybe a park exchange has just come up recently.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it's part of the agreement. I don't know. But if there were to be an exchange of the city property.
Well, and I think that park piece that they were talking about to the west, if that was to happen, would start somewhere right about in here, I believe, and go west. In fact, that was one of the things we asked was, did our site get taken over by that? No, our site that we have in mind is outside of that, but maybe it becomes part of a package.
And is that site that you have right there, who owns that right now?
Belongs to the Powers. They're the folks that owned all of this ground. So they're the ones that currently own what's the proposed school site that we just did the lot division on. They were the ones that own the ground originally underneath the Grove apartment complex and Southview all the way out to the highway. So they own all of that property.
And they are the ones that are interested in the exchange?
Well, they would be the owners of all of that ground. Obviously, the city owns the park property here, but all of that potential exchange land belongs to them, yes. So same property owner throughout, which is hopeful, actually. Okay, so just to give you some ideas of what's happening, these are the 3 current projects, starting with Vista. These are all currently under construction, and so you'll see them in various stages of a mess, if you will. But I wanted to give you a little idea of what these buildings could look like. Most likely, the Phase 2 buildings are going to be similar to the Phase 1 buildings, with the caveat that within Phase 1, 2 of the buildings will look alike, and one looks a little different. This is the different one. This is Vista, and it's a little different because it is up near the Vista Reservoir. It's tucked into this hillside, so we tried to do a very different treatment with it with respect to it's not standing out there alone. We wanted to try to get it as far into the hill, below the skyline, so it wasn't that visible to the neighbors all the way around us because we're up on top of the ridge. And so we pushed it back into the hillside. It has a single shed roof design which flows towards the hillside. And, you can see the earthwork comes up pretty close. We'll have landscaping all the way around this, some new trees planted and all that to try to hide it as much as we can, simply because of its location being up high and being visible to the community around it. We want to keep it as subtle as possible. So in this particular location, though, the building material types are consistent with the others, 2 that are under construction and what we propose moving forward. And that is essentially that it's a CMU-style building. It's a split face with a color within it, so it's not just a typical plain gray. This happens to be what they would consider a black block. In this case, it's a sort of a golden tone. It's almost a tan, but they'd call it more of a golden tone as an accent line. And then the standing seam metal roof, which is also on the fascia here on this building. These are glass block inserts here to let light into the space, metal doors, that type of thing. So this is the kind of construction that we typically do on buildings of this nature. They are fairly cost-effective as compared to other types of building materials. Their longevity is tremendous, and they're very low maintenance because, frankly, you don't have to do much to this. right? And this block will be here a long, long time and retain a pretty good aesthetic. The metal roof obviously will need some attention over the years, but again, they do quite well with that type of material in the long term. Same with the metal doors. The White Avenue Station and the Taylor Station, which are the last two, are more indicative of what we propose on the two stations within Phase 2. So this is the White Avenue Station. This is White Avenue out here, looking kind of to the west, back towards the mall, East Side Mall, back in this direction, Mountain View intersection. So this station is much further along. Obviously, the exterior is complete. They've done the grading. You can see the greenish colors because they've put in the hydroseed. And this picture was just taken today, actually. What's not here yet is all the landscaping that will be going around this structure, so there will be something here to soften the overall look. But this is, again, somewhat indicative of the style we're talking about, more of a rectangular structure, typical A-frame type of roof structure, some dormers over the door areas just to break up the roof line and give it a little bit more character, if you will. Again, similar block pattern. In fact, this is the same block color pattern with the glass blocks here for lighting, vents on the end. Get a feel for what that looks like. Happens to be a green roof on this one.
How much does that building cost?
I can't tell you specifically the building itself
General
because it's
idea.
part of the overall. The overall Phase 1 project, as I recall, was about $2.2 million for 3 stations.
For 3 stations.
3 stations, yeah. And that includes all the plumbing, all the mechanical, all the electrical, HVAC, underground, paving, building, all of it. So
Somewhere in that, there's, the building itself has to be
within
broken
that,
out.
yeah, they're in there, right.
And this, I'm assuming these 3 were all the same design contract and
Yep,
building contract?
yep, all one design. That was with Keller Associates, Phase 1, and one construction contract. Okay.
Just be interesting to know what this building style costs relative to what the downtown restrooms cost.
I knew you were going there.
Yeah.
I knew he was going there.
There's that question.
Cost per square foot, yeah.
So one of the items that is included in all of these now is an on-site generator. So it's backup emergency power. They look like this. They are a standalone unit. They're outside. They are completely encased. They are soundproofed, so they meet all of our noise ordinance requirements, noise level standards. They're good out in the weather. And they generally only run when the power's off or occasionally when they cycle through just to keep everything fresh because you want to make sure they're going to operate when you need them. So if power runs, we don't have any power shut off or any power failures for an extended period, every once in a while the station will have a run cycle for 10, 15 minutes, something of that nature, just to fresh the gas and keep things going. So that's what is in place in all those locations. This is the interior, and you can see it's quite a bit different than the others, right? For one thing, obviously the scale is quite a bit larger. There are actually locations for 5 pumps in this particular setup. The 3 here, the smaller ones, are the domestic pump locations. The bigger ones down here for fire pumps. In this case, there are 2 domestic pumps in place already. This third one you see comes up and just ends right there, and there's a gap, and then it picks up again right there. So that's a blank. That's open and empty at the moment. That is because this particular station has the potential to feed an expanding service area. So we sized it with all the plumbing and the electronic systems to be able to add that 3rd domestic pump in the system when the demand grows in the future. Okay. With multiple pumps, of course, we have redundancy. So if one goes offline, you keep the other one running while you make the repairs. If you have higher demand, you can have 2 of them kick online. Same thing with the fire pumps. You can see how much more light we have because of just the glass blocks within the system. There is, of course, overhead lighting as well. Obviously more spacious, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that doing maintenance around these things is a challenge. Mm-hmm. And these units get very heavy. When you start looking at the size of the fire pump systems, those are not easy to move. So when you have to do maintenance on these, if you have to take one of these out, you have to bring in a little portable crane unit that you can roll in here, lift it up, roll it out, where you can get it loaded on a truck and haul it off for maintenance. So having the space to do that and safely be able to move people around within these areas amongst the moving parts and not get caught up with things or creating trip hazards is pretty vital. Those old stations do not provide that. And so that's part of why these look a lot roomier, but they're actually pretty tight in terms of just making sure we have sufficient space, but not going really any bigger than that.
And it's dry.
And it's dry. It better be dry. So that's the plan. Obviously, updated electrical systems, electrical panels, control systems, everything current as it should be, meeting all the current electrical codes. Just another view from the other direction. So these are the fire pumps. Again, the blank at the moment, and then the 3 units at the far end, or the 2 units at the far end, excuse me, for the domestic flow.
Great.
Eventually, there will be landscaping all the way around it. This happens to be from the south, so this is actually the edge of the bus barn. Some landscaping there next to the that's Harvest Green Acres development. So as we get landscaping around it, it'll be more like this, where it'll be a little bit more shielded to the community around it. But again, we were trying to find a style that kind of fit with what was in the neighborhood, color patterns, which is a challenge in this neighborhood because there's a lot of different color buildings out there, but colors that would blend in with the community. So that was the idea. And then the Tater Station, the last of the 3 that were currently under construction, there it is. No, this is the old Tater Station. That's the one we're replacing. That's not a really expensive
With a
one.
more retro design on this one.
Yeah, a more retro, and we figured the operators had been here a long time. We'd want to have one to remind them of the old days. So yeah, no, that's the current building that's out there. It's pretty small. Again, half of that station is still underground, so you actually come downstairs once you come in that doorway to get to it. Very small. Turning around from that spot, though, this is the new building, and it's a similar style, similar color pattern. One of the main differences here in the exterior is the black block is now the trim, or the height, the accessory, if you will, versus that tannish gold is the main color. This is a black roof. So black and gold next to the university. This is actually on university property. That was kind of our intent here aesthetically, was to try to blend in a bit with the university's color scheme. So again, you see the generator there to the side. This area will be paved, so we'll have a paved area for the vehicles to come in, access the double doors, park while they're doing maintenance, that type of thing. All the sites will have that type of a paving area as well. Interior of this one, not quite as far as long in some ways. Similar structure, 2 boosters for fire, 3 for domestic flow. In this case, all 3 are in place because that particular Taylor zone is not anticipated to grow beyond its current footprint. So it's full build out, if you will. And there's a lot of stuff in there. That's how it looks a bit from the distance, obviously along Taylor.
Size? Are they about the same size?
Pretty similar in this one. It's a few feet different, but very similar footprint on the overall structure.
It's a lot of equipment to get in there.
It is.
Was the other one? Oh, it was up this way a little bit more.
It's
right?
actually, it's standing in this picture is immediately behind you,
Okay, right.
just to the left. In fact, I think that fire hydrant might show up.
What do you do when you take all that offline? What do you do with all that? Will you tear it down?
Eventually, what's inside will come out. We haven't talked about this particular building, what we do with it. I suspect over time we will demo and just restore it back to more of a natural condition. The other vaults that are underground ultimately will pull the equipment out of it and hard pipe anything through it that needs to be hard piped, so we don't have a potential for leakage or anything within those old systems that are not being used.
Possibly move engineering into there.
Maybe
IT.
we could make it the annex. Yeah, it would be very similar in nature to what we currently live in over there. So yeah, they'd feel right at home. But yeah. So anyway, that gives you an idea of generally what we've been building, and what we anticipate as Phase 2 buildings will be very similar to this. In fact, we'll probably just start with this as the template, and if there's a reason to make it something different, we'll look at doing that. But we have these. We've laid out the concepts. Just a question of sizing. If there's any unique features to the 2 new sites in Phase 2, we'll address that. But most likely, they'll look very similar to this. With this type of an accent, this type of construction, we'll determine if we need to make any changes in color from this.
Well protected. I think it's really important the way, the access to the buildings is so limited, and from all of the elements too, not just snow and rain, but everything that's out there. And I had wanted to ask you, so have there been complaints about the other stations?
No,
In terms
not really.
of noise,
Being underground, people don't even know they're there, frankly. The Taylor station is, near some homes. That's probably the closest, actually, right there. But big CMU building in this case, and all the new ones, they do pretty well at dampening the sound. And so you're not going to get much noise out of these structures. And again, the generator is all soundproofed. It will put up some noise, but it only runs, during the power outage or the occasional exercising cycle. So it's not something you're going to hear except when, power goes out for an extended period, then it will be on. So yeah, as far as, one question was raised about, is there going to be an issue for sound for the neighbors? We don't anticipate that at all in these locations.
Is it a common design that what you all are doing here?
For CMU type structures, it really is. We looked at the options of AD do a typical stick frame or metal frame building with all the features that go along with that. Cost wise, they're fairly comparable by the time you put all the layers in, insulation, interior, walls, if you will, exterior, waterproof walls, all of that type of thing. And yet the problem with the stick frame is the maintenance cost. The longevity is not nearly as high, and that after a few years you're painting or replacing siding after some time. With these, frankly, they don't take a heck of a lot.
Yeah, that's good.
Obviously, we'll have to pay attention to the roof lines, and there may be some fascia that needs to be touched up here and there, and the doors over time they'll get a little banged up when equipment comes and goes, so we deal with those types of things. But generally, these kind of structures will last a long time with not a huge amount of maintenance.
That's great.
Is there the more northwest option for the Indian Hills one that you had there? Mm-hmm. That's on a pretty steep area, isn't it?
When you're just coming off of Southview Drive, it's not bad for a distance, and then about the back of that set of lots is where it really takes off and goes up. So yeah, there's some grade to it, such enough that it would be perhaps challenging for a home right in there to get a flat pad that's big enough, but our footprint's smaller, and so getting a flat pad on the grade that's there we think is pretty doable in that location. And there's a little grade on the location down here as well, not quite as much perhaps. But again, our footprint is small enough that we're able to deal with that.
Super cool. Okay. Jim, you have any questions?
I'm good.
So again, what's before you today is design contract with JEB Engineers. They are here in Moscow, and Corey Bowney, I should have mentioned, is here, right behind me, from JUB, if we have any questions for him. And again, this is design of the 2 booster stations and the water systems that we've talked about, and construction management assistance to the city for both of those endeavors. And then those additional services that I talked about in terms of the VFD analysis and the green memo and those types of things.
Is this something where there is any public process of noticing for the people that live very close by to provide input? Or
typically not on these types of projects. They're a public infrastructure project. They go through a building permit process. The one area that, if they're required, that we do have public processes that would kick in here would be if there's a conditional use process. Mm-hmm. And on the first phase, there were conditional use permits required on a couple of the sites, simply because of the zoning. And public facilities are allowed within them in that zone, but with a conditional use permit. So out of that process, there were some conditions set on some of those sites pertaining to some safety issues, some landscaping, particularly on the White Avenue, those types of things that will be included in the projects. So that would be the one area where it would typically go through a public process if a conditional use permit is required on these sites.
And these locations do not require a conditional use permit?
Actually, I can't answer that right now.
Okay.
That's one of the questions I've got for our planning department that I got to think about the other day as we were bringing this forward, as we need to get through that process if that is indeed required on these. And I just need to confirm it. This one, I'm not so sure because of the zoning that it would be, but we'll double check.
And I figured this is all going to be Wisescape.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at. At the other booster station sites, also well 10, we'll be doing landscaping around that site as well, and we are looking at as much as we can to do Wisescape.
Yeah.
type landscaping, for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the water use, and doing what we promote in the community and out of the water department in particular, and certainly the lower maintenance aspects of it.
Very good. I don't have any questions. No, so then we should recommend approval?
Yeah, I would recommend approval of the task order agreement. Probably should be presented on the regular agenda, so everyone on council gets a chance to see
all caught
these
up.
structures. And
Certainly.
Great, so then we'll approve it? Yeah? And put on regular agenda?
Recommend approval.
Great.
Okay. Very
Thanks,
good.
Les.
Thank you.
All right, very nice. And I think last on the agenda, let me find my agenda, sorry.
Here you go.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, so we have our Tim Davis with the long-term disposal RFP update.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to start out with just a little bit of background. The City of Moscow currently has a contract with Waste Connections to transport and dispose of our municipal solid waste, and it's currently shipped down to Finley Butte's landfill in Boardman, Oregon. This contract has one remaining 5-year option, which would begin October 1st, 2018, if the city chooses to exercise. The waste is currently trucked from our transfer station out on Highway 8 down to the Finley Butte site. The contract was originally awarded to Waste Management back in 1993. At that time, Waste Management had plans to open a regional landfill in the Washtenaw, Hooper, Washington area. Those plans never came to fruition, and Waste Management ended up hauling Moscow waste to Columbia Ridge Landfill in Arlington, Oregon. Not opening that Washtenaw site ended up costing Waste Management an extra 300 miles of round trip per load that they haul, so it became quite costly for them. Empire Disposal of Colfax was the original subcontractor for Waste Management, and they provided all the trucking services for the contract. Empire Disposal was later acquired by Waste Connections. Waste Management assigned the contract to Waste Connections back in 2009, as Waste Connections also owned their own regional landfill where the waste is currently hauled in Boardman, Oregon, which cut 32 miles off of each load hauled. And that may not seem like a lot, but when fuel was running at $4 or $5 a gallon, it saved a lot of money over time. We haul a little over 600 loads per year. So the current contract costs were based on Moscow's waste being hauled to that Washtenaw site, which would have been a 148-mile round trip as compared to a 448-mile round trip currently. So this has been a very favorable contract for Moscow over the years it's been in place. Then recently, many of the larger disposal companies have made deals with the railroad for long-term transportation of waste to their regional landfill sites. One of the regional rail hubs is located in the Spokane Valley. Several northeastern Washington counties, as well as Whitman County, have taken advantage of this hybrid transportation service where containers of waste are trucked from the transfer station to the rail hub, and then the containers are loaded onto rail cars, and it is railed the remainder of the way down to the regional landfill. Whitman County's current cost for transportation and disposal is comparable to what Moscow is currently paying. We also discussed with Waste Connections and approached them about extending Moscow's current transportation and disposal contract under the same terms, but that was declined. They insisted that any extension be tied to a fuel peg or surcharge escalator. And tying escalators to fuel fluctuations is not a good thing. So staff has developed a request for proposal for transportation and disposal for Moscow municipal solid waste. We feel that it's a good opportunity to competitively test the waters for a longer-term contract while maintaining our leverage of having our final 5-year option on our current contract. By issuing this RFP, the City of Moscow will not be under any obligation to enter into a new contract with any of the proposers for this RFP, but we feel it might be a good thing just to go out and test those waters. questions?
Yeah. I don't have any questions. I think that's great.
So we're going to move forward with that. I've been through the RFP. Gary's reviewed it, and we'll probably issue that this week. As we get proposals in, obviously that will come forward to council at that point. In tandem with this RFP, we've also issued a RFQ, which is a request for qualifications for development of a comprehensive sanitation system master plan that was issued at the end of November. I wanted to just go through a few of the tasks that were mentioned in that RFQ. They include evaluation of existing sanitation infrastructure and programs to identify any vulnerabilities. The process will include an evaluation of current recycling program operations as well as impacts from recently implemented programs, including the roll cart garbage collection, single stream recycling collection, alternatives for yard waste drop-off, including the potential for a yard waste curbside collection program, and relocation of the current recycling center. Public participation processes through survey to determine the wants and needs of the community. We'll have stakeholder meetings and a workshop presentation to City Council when that concludes. We've also asked the proposers to develop a capital improvement plan which recognizes the deficiencies and challenge areas at the current recycling center and address how these may be improved upon with the relocation of the recycle center. And then the last thing we've asked is a feasibility analysis of operating a local material recovery facility for single stream recycling materials. We currently ship baled single-stream recycling materials to a MRF in the Seattle area, and it's a costly part of the single-stream program. So we want to know if it's viable to do that sort of work with not only our own tonnage, but the Quad Cities tonnage, meaning Lewiston, Clarkston, Pullman, and Moscow. So they'll be looking at both of that to see if there's any viability to that. Then we put together a selection committee which will be interviewing the respondents for these proposals on January 17th. So when we get to that process, that will obviously come forward to council at that time.
I heard this earlier at the admin committee, and something I should have asked and I didn't is what's our current contamination rate that we're dealing with at the MRF in Seattle on our single stream?
To my knowledge, it hasn't changed since we first began, and it was just around 4%, I believe.
Is that good?
Well, yeah.
That's very good.
That's really
That's very
good. And that
good.
means people haven't gotten lazy,
It's
too.
very good. Although
I mean,
China has put in some bans that are going to be taking effect where they're going to allow 0.5%, which is not achievable by anybody at this point in time.
Right.
So you may be hearing more from me on that as that continues. We have been in contact with our folks over in Seattle where our material goes, and they are not changing a thing as of now, and I get reports about every month, to see what's happening with that China ban as far as recyclables go. But at this point, everything's steady as she goes, and I think what it's done is it's helped us clean up the materials for one thing, because we were sending a lot of crap to China, but it has helped develop more domestic markets for some of these materials that China's trying to keep out in terms of plastic and mixed paper and that type of thing. So,
I had a question for clarification, just in my understanding for this request. So is there a comparative done too? So when we send out and somebody says, we're putting your master plan together and these are the things that we're going to look at, do we have any other cities our size that are doing a comparable type of program?
In the state of Washington, I know it's mandatory to have a comp plan. In Idaho, I do not believe it is, and I think every community is a little different. Their infrastructure's a little different. Their their contractual collection agreements, everything along the lines a little different. So I don't know. I think it'd be tough to compare.
Okay.
I mean, there'll be some similarities in general, but
Well, when you're talking about the contamination rate on recyclables that are exported, that's post-MRF. So it would depend on the efficiency of the MRF,
absolutely.
so we could possibly build that in so we could get a higher value for our
Absolutely.
recyclables than maybe they're getting there.
That'll be what some of the things that we'll be looking at exactly.
What is the deadline for determining if you're going to take that last 5-year extension? Is it October 1st or?
We have to notify Waste Connections by June 1.
Okay.
That was the purpose in putting this RFP together late this fall and getting that out there. There's a lot of pieces that have to come together, and then we also had the master planning going on at the same time. So it's been a busy fall and winter.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of strategic planning. Now, does this go on to regular Jen as a report, or do we just keep it here and you keep
It's
moving
just
forward
a
till the
report,
next
and
steps?
our
Okay.
intention is to issue probably tomorrow or Wednesday, and then as those proposals come in, we'll obviously bring those forward to council for your consideration at that point.
Okay, great.
That was it.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
And that concludes our meeting.
Thanks, Jim.